The opportunity is chicken.
The opportunity is honey.
The opportunity is community.
Youth.
Distribution.
The opportunity is Africa. Brought to you by Africa Eats on Africa Business Radio.
And we're back, and we got big news. So those entrepreneurs you heard back in 2019 in the first few episodes, if you didn't listen to those, go back, listen to those now. They're still relevant. Well, those entrepreneurs, I personally met them through the Fledge Accelerator program. That's a global network of mission-driven for-profit business accelerators. They're on pretty much every continent in the world. We run tons of programs. We've graduated over 100 companies doing all sorts of things. Well, when the pandemic hit, we took 26 of those graduates. 26, all run by native African entrepreneurs, all focused on the food and ag supply chain in Africa. We took those 26 plus one more, and we bundled them together into something that's new, something that's never really been tried before. It's called Africa Eats. It's an investment holding company and a growth stage accelerator, and a way to help these companies grow up to be major brands, to be big $10 million a year, $100 million a year, $1 billion companies. And we started this right when the lockdown started hitting the US and Europe in 2020. And we've been busy helping them ever since. And with more than 24 companies to talk about, yeah, we got plenty of content to bring you in the upcoming months. So what exactly is Africa Eats? Let me walk you through that story. Africa Eats is here to solve three humongous problems. The first one, it's called hunger. The second one is even bigger. It's called poverty. And the third one, it's not quite as big, but it's just as challenging. It's called funding. How on earth do you fund the solutions that solve poverty and hunger? All right, we know what the problems are in Africa in terms of hunger, in terms of people not having enough food to eat. Ultimately, when you step back and look at this, it's a pretty simple problem. Most Africans are farmers, and yet they don't grow enough food to feed everyone on the continent. That's a problem. We need to fix that. None of the other problems, right? 17 Sustainable Development Goals, Millennial Goals, however else you couch these problems, we're not going to solve any of them until everyone is eating the food they need to eat. So, most Africans are farmers, and yet they're importing food. How much food? A lot of food. I've seen a lot of numbers thrown out there. The one I'm believing is $11 billion of imports per year. $11 billion of food that's imported onto the continent because too much of the food is lost between the farms and the customers. Maybe it's 20 billion, maybe it's 30 billion, maybe it's 50 billion, it doesn't matter. It's money that these countries, right, as a whole don't have because they have to buy that food in dollars, and therefore they have to borrow dollars to have the dollars to go and buy the food. It's just a vicious cycle. It can't go on. And that's not the root cause of poverty in Africa, but it's certainly not helping poverty in Africa. And if we solve the hunger problem in Africa, we save the people of Africa billions of dollars a year, plus interest, plus all the other headaches that come from that. So that's a good step toward poverty, and we can do more. Now, how do we solve these problems? Well, the solutions are sitting there on the continent. We don't need solutions from the US and Europe and Asia. We don't need big, bright ideas of the people who don't live on the continent telling the people in Africa how this is done. Instead, the solutions are all over the place. I know this. I know this personally because thousands and thousands of African entrepreneurs apply to these Fledge accelerators all over the world, and I read those applications. I've personally talked to hundreds of African entrepreneurs that have amazingly good ideas, and if only they had the funding to get those ideas up to major scale, right, national scale, we would solve these problems. But the problem is, not enough funding is chasing those solutions. Now, the number one way that funding shows up in Africa for ideas like this is philanthropy. And even if philanthropy was really good at finding these solutions and funding them, which it's not, even if it was, there just isn't enough philanthropy flowing into Africa. The money has to come from for-profiteers. It has to come from lenders and equity investors and angels and venture capital funds. The whole solution here, the true set of solutions for hunger and poverty is going to add up to a few $1 trillion. Right? You can't do this with millions or billions. It's going to take an enormous sum of money, and the only place you'll find that enormous sum of money is by for-profiteers. So we need more of them. There are some that exist today. There are hundreds of institutions that lend and invest in African startups. Problem is, they tend to only invest in the biggest of the African startups, which means these great ideas that I'm seeing, they're just not getting funded. So here's the solution. Again, we had already found 26 of these companies in 10 different countries spread across the continent. We had already trained them in Fledge, and Fledge invests in the companies that come through the program. So we actually wrote them a check already. All right, so we took these 26 companies plus this one extra accounting company. Everybody needs accounting. So we took 27 companies and we put them together into a holding company. Not one big company. We didn't make a conglomerate here of one big company. We own little tiny minority stakes in these companies. We took our little minority stakes and we lumped them together, and we call that the holding company. And with this idea that we're owning a little bit of each company, we're always staying a minority owner, but we're here to support them and fund them and give them all the nurturing they need to become big companies. And we look at the statistics. We look at, let's say, their aggregate revenues as if they were one big company. So how big are they if they were one big company? Well, they're pretty big. So in 2020, in total, when you add up all their revenues and you convert them all into dollars, because they're all doing business in 10 different currencies, but if we add them all up into US dollars, they were $9.8 million of revenue. That's a lot of money, right? That's almost $10 million of revenue in 2020. That was a lot of growth from 2019. And again, there was a pandemic. We didn't expect any growth last year. We expected revenues to be flat, but they weren't. 2019 revenues were $6.9 million. So they went from 6.9 to 9.8 in 1 year. That's 40% growth. We went back and asked them for all their revenue numbers as far back as they could, right? Back to the beginning of their existence. And when we look at like how big were they in 2014, of these 27, only 8 of them were running in 2014. And collectively, in 2014, so 6.5 years ago, they only earned a collective $600,000. So they've grown since 2014 to 2020. They grew from $600,000 to $9.8 million. That's what we mean by the opportunity is Africa. Okay, one more number, because we're halfway through 2021 now. How big are they now? Well, in the first 6 months of 2021, these companies, these same 27, not adding any more, not losing any, these same companies earned $8.3 million in the first half of the year. Now, that's on track to grow by 70% in 1 year. And when we look back in history and say, okay, what's the average growth rate of these companies over all these years? It's over 60%. These companies are more than doubling every other year. They're growing 60% on average, not all of them the same, but they're growing about 60% on average year over year, and all but 3 were profitable last year. Right? 2 because of the pandemic, 1 because it's growing so fast it just can't keep up. Okay, I know that's a lot of numbers. It makes more sense when you see it in slides, but it's a big company. It's 10 million last year. It'll be 15 or 20 million this year. And the question is, how long until these companies earn $100 million? That's the big question that we've been asking. And the answer is soon. The answer is the middle of the decade. Maybe it'll be 2025. Maybe it'll be 2026. Maybe we're a little rosy and things will slow down and it'll be 2027. But it will be this decade. Well before the end of the decade. Right? $100 million of revenues from companies that, remember, 2014, all of them together were only earning $600,000. Right? Individually, they were only earning $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 apiece back in 2014. And even today, a lot of the companies in this portfolio, a lot of these companies are only earning $100,000, $200,000 a year. These are not big companies individually. It's only big as an aggregate, as a group. And so we put them together on purpose to make them more visible and to make them more interesting to institutions, to make them more investable, to make them more investable as a whole from those people who control the checkbooks from these investment institutions. All right, that's all well and good. That's all top line financial numbers. Let's talk about impact, right? Because we're trying to solve hunger and poverty. And so let's talk about the impact. Well, ultimately what we're talking about when we talk about impact is smallholder farmers. So again, most Africans are smallholder farmers. Majority of the people are either kids. Half the people in Africa are under the age of 18. Of the adults, more than half are farmers. Right? We call them smallholder farmers, if you don't know the term, because they're generally an acre or 2 acres or maybe 3 or 4 acres. But most of them are an acre or smaller. Right? They're growing food for their family, and in a good season, they have a little surplus to sell somewhere else. Maybe they have a few chickens in order to earn some income, either selling the chickens or the eggs. Maybe they have a pig or a goat or some other animals as well. But across the whole continent, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people, the majority of the people. And so what we know, another KPI we measure in this group, is how many farmers are we helping? And as of the end of last year, end of 2020, it was 34,479 to be precise. And as of right now, we don't know exactly right now, but it's getting close to 50,000. So nowhere near 100 million yet, or 200 million, or 300 million, but it's on its way to 100,000. And these are farmers who are directly interacting with these companies in this portfolio. I'll explain that in a bit. Now, this is a for-profit company. We are investing in these companies because A, we want to solve those problems, hunger and poverty, but we want to do it because we want to make money doing it, because then it attracts more money, and ultimately that's a virtuous cycle that will bring the billions and eventually, with copycats, the trillions of dollars needed to solve these problems. And so the secret on how you do that and build that virtuous cycle is not actually to worry about the farmers. You let the companies worry about the farmers. You worry about the companies. Right? And so what these companies all have in common is they're all part of the food supply chain in Africa. Right? The food and ag supply chain, from seeds to cooking. And so what kind of companies are we talking about? Well, if you go listen to the past episodes, you'll hear the stories from a bunch of them because they're in there. But in general, you can think of it as 3 different types of companies. First one is the biggest group, right? It's about a dozen of the companies. It's the aggregator, processor, distributors. And the biggest of these is East Africa Fruits. You heard from Ellie a few episodes ago. They buy from smallholder farmers. It's really simple. There are smallholder farmers that grow potatoes and onions and mangoes and pineapples and rice and beans and bananas. And East Africa Fruits buys from thousands of these farmers, collects them in refrigerated trucks, brings them to distribution centers, sorts out the worst of the stuff, sorts out the best of the stuff, and then sells to thousands and thousands of retailers. They are by far the biggest aggregator distributor of fruits and vegetables in Tanzania. We do something similar with chickens in Western Kenya. So Chicken Basket, who you heard from in a previous episode, well, they sell chicks, feeds, and medicines in batches of 100 for farmers to grow into fully grown market chickens, and then they buy the chickens, they process them, and they distribute them to hotels, supermarkets, retailers, and into their own restaurants. We do the same thing with fish in eastern Uganda with Giassi. They grow the fingerlings, they make the feed, they get those to the fish farmers, they aggregate the market-ready fish, they sell them through a distributed collection of women and youth. It's an amazing story. We do it with 4 honey companies. The largest in Botswana, called Kalahari Honey. Second largest in Tanzania, Swahili Honey. One that's grown really fast in Ghana, named Tila. And one that's still small, but we're going to help it grow up, called Honey Products, Malawi. And there's more. I'm not going to go through all 27. If you haven't heard from them already, you'll hear from them in future episodes. Okay, I said 3 kinds of companies. The second are the service providers. And there's no two alike here. We got AgroSupply in Uganda that lets farmers invest in agriculture. We got Cold Hubs in Nigeria selling cold as a service in solar-powered cold rooms that are inside the marketplaces in Nigeria. We got Zoeto in Malawi, the largest distributor of agrovet supplies. We got Boca Feeds in Kisii, Kenya, the only animal feed company in that whole region of the country. And more. And then we got the third category, which are companies that take agricultural wastes and turn them into cooking fuel. And that includes Kenkoko in Kenya, Green Charcoal Uganda in Uganda, and Obama Stove in Ethiopia. And Obama Stove, as the name implies, is also a cookstove company. It's the largest cookstove company in Ethiopia. It's the second largest cookstove company in the whole continent of Africa. And we'll have some big news about that in the coming weeks. All right, and as I said before, these are 27 companies run by 27 entrepreneurs, all native African, all but one living in his home country or her home country. And we're here to help them grow. That's how we see solving hunger and poverty in Africa, is by growing these companies. And then once we get these going, we'll get 27 more, and then 27 more, and then 27 more. But right now, we're just focused on these 27. And we're here to make them stronger. We're here to make them stronger by having one of our 27 be an accounting firm, because everybody needs good accounting. So Built Accounting from Ghana built something like QuickBooks in Ghana for Africans, by Africans. We do this by putting solar on rooftops in a solar leasing system. We do this by launching truck leases so that everybody can have as many trucks as they need to get all the food wherever it needs to go. And we do this with an amazing little team based in Nairobi. Not me, but everybody else based in Nairobi. And you'll hear from them too in future episodes. And we've done all this so far in just a few $1 million, all of it from US and Canadian investors. Because as we said, third goal we're trying to solve is funding. And so we've built a system here that attracts the attention and the capital from outside of Africa to bring it into Africa to solve the problems. Because capital is the one thing, it's the only thing that's holding back the solutions to hunger and poverty in Africa. And these solutions will ultimately make huge amounts of money. And that's why I'm spending my time and my energy on this, because this is going to be huge. And this is why I'm saying the opportunity is Africa.
The opportunity is Africa. Brought to you by Africa Eats on Africa Business Radio.